So thank you all for joining our Trust Your Supplier podcast. Today's a little bit different, something that scares us all, which is really about financial crime and how that impacts our businesses today, even from a personal perspective as well. So today, my name is Michelle Armstrong. I am our global value engineer here at Trust Your Supplier, and I like to manage and understand all of our compliance and regulations and risk awareness within our landscape. We've got my colleague Chad Hill with us today as well.
Yeah, Chad Hill, Chief Revenue Officer at Trust Your Supplier. Looking forward to the conversation today.
And we are very lucky to have representatives from one of our strategic partner relationships. So we have our Moody's team. So we have a USA element. So Eric, if you'd like to introduce yourself, and then Nicola, please.
Hi, thanks, Michelle. My name is Eric Velasco. I'm a domain sales specialist here at Moody's, covering our corporate clients in North America. And my main focus is third-party risk management, data and software, as well as financial crimes compliance.
Brilliant. And Nicola from Italy.
Hi, Michelle. Yes. So I'm Nicola Cirillo. I'm based in Milan, and I'm the industry practice lead in financial crime compliance covering the EMEA region. Thank you.
Brilliant. And what we've also done is, because we need to get, a very diversified look at this. It's not just about looking at the risk providers and what you provide, but we've also invited David Robertson from Beazley to really give us an understanding of how that is impactful within our organizations. So David, great to introduce you to the rest of the team.
Yeah, thanks, Michelle. Great to be here. So yeah, David Robertson. I'm the head of financial crime at Beazley, which is a general insurer operating in the Lloyd's market, London market, but also global presence as well. So yeah, thanks for having me.
Brilliant. So everyone, this is a very relaxed set of questions that I'm going to have. I want to try and make sure that the questions are looking at what compliance and regulations are doing today, how impactful they are for our industry, supply chain. And then, David, I'll come to you as well, just to try and give us an understanding of how you're utilizing that information, what you're seeing within industries today. I hope that's okay. So I'm going to put a little note out first, because I think it's really interesting. Question to both all of you. Do you know when the first recorded instance of money laundering was and where? David, I know you know the answer to this.
That's why you put me on the spot. I don't. I'm interested to know.
Anybody?
Yeah.
So I'm going to tell you that it happened in ancient China, where merchants would hide their wealth from rulers by investing in businesses in other provinces. I don't think really it's changed that much. I think we're still trying to do that today. And I've got a question actually to you, Nicola. How do you think the clever Chinese were back then and their ancient methods compared to today's sophisticated money laundering and financial crime scenarios?
So yes, I think in modern times, the techniques used for asset concealment have become more sophisticated. And this often involves complex financial structures and offshore accounts, allowing criminals and fraudsters to move illicit funds around. And they often leverage clearly advanced technology to safeguard anonymity and reinvest in lucrative activities. However, today, some what you called old-fashioned illicit schemes persist, involving individuals known as awaladars and money mules. So the awala system is a compensation mechanism based on a non-physical transfer of money through a network of brokers known as awaladars, and who often belong to the same community or family. And in this system, essentially, a person gives money to an awaladar, let's say in Germany, who then instructs another awaladar based in the Middle East to pay the recipient, maybe to finance a terrorist attack. And this was very much of an ancient money transfer system that still exists because of its informal nature. Money mules, at the same time, receive funds from drug or human trafficker, enter their bank accounts, and they provide a service by transferring or withdrawing cash to give to someone else, and earning a commission in the process to become de facto money launderers. Think of the Daigou model in China exploit money mules, often students, Chinese students, who travel with dirty money to purchase expensive goods in luxury stores in Europe, which are then exported to China for resell at a profit. So you see, there's still old-fashioned system that still today apply.
It's interesting, isn't it? So have we really evolved very much in this area? It still seems that there's benefits in how they initiated the laundering even back then, which is quite scary. And to take that, and probably yourself and Eric, I'd love to understand that. When I look at compliance and compliance regulations today and the amount of information that there is around adverse media, sanctions, etc., give me an overview of today's view of what the financial crime landscape is. What's happening from a compliance perspective? How's it evolving? More importantly, how the economic situation that we have globally at the moment, new presidential elections, etc., how's it really changed?
So financial crimes are continually evolving, becoming clearly sophisticated due to technological advancements, as I said, with use of cryptocurrencies, encrypted messaging, application, and dark web marketplaces. We know that the digital acceleration of society has led to a significant increase in cyber attacks, with crime syndicates forming alliances and providing specialized services, crime as a service. In addition, the global geopolitical crisis often create opportunities conducive to the proliferation of such crimes. Now, the pace of change in the world is accelerating, and this is equally true for financial crime typologies. What is worrisome is that criminal activities have become a deeply entrenched system within the legal economy, partly facilitated by professional intermediaries. And this system has the ability to amplify profits from unlawful activities and launder them on an industrial basis, never seen before. Imagine 80% of criminal networks in the European Union exploit perfectly legal entities, legitimate, to carry out their crimes. Can you spot them? Criminal proceeds fuel corruption, which in turn promotes more crime. And academic studies have used, for instance, our data to find out sudden suspicious change of ownership in companies during the COVID-19 pandemic, especially when the victim was experiencing financial distress. So to effectively manage financial crime for our clients, we think there are three key elements that need to be prioritized. First, to ensure data quality in terms of materiality, accuracy, and timelessness, as even the best control system can fail with poor data input. Second, we employ the detailed taxonomy for risk categorization, including fraud, corruption, sanctions, human trafficking, to name a few, each with varying severity levels to carry out tailored risk assessments. And lastly, it's important to use analytics to establish connection between individuals and companies. Technology serves as the platform enabling these processes, facilitating cross-functional collaboration within organizations, bringing down the silos.
Wow. Do you know what? That's just opened up my mind in so many different avenues that I want to talk to you about. One in particular is something that I stress all the time, that if you don't have your core set of master data validated, verified, and continuously monitored, then all you're doing is actually incurring risk because you're not aware of what that change could actually do or be impactful from a financial perspective. Thank you. That's really opened my eyes. And David, to take that, and I know you've been doing a lot of data cleansing, etc. There's all these compliances. To me, there's no borders anymore when it comes to financial compliance and risk as well. What are the biggest challenges that you are facing from a financial crime perspective, especially in the environment that you work in?
Yeah, thanks, Michelle. Great question. I mean, probably to follow on from what Nicola was just talking about there, I think data is a key one, really. When we look at the world we're in these days, and the amount of information available, I think leveraging that data is quite key. Making sure you have robust data governance, the right data entry, right data input and validation. Financial crime, much like most other processes, I would imagine within most organizations, is simply a downstream user of that data from when it first comes in. So making sure it's there, it's cleansed, it's accurate, and you have timely updates is going to be quite key to making sure you keep on top of that risk. I think the biggest challenges we probably face from a practitioner's perspective, and a lot of this is the regulation itself and the pace of change within regulation. I was just going to talk very quickly just to give some context around this as well, because it was quite interesting for me. There was a recent report issued by the NASDAQ, which really looked at the amount of illicit funds flowing through the global financial system, which is quite a staggering amount. They calculated $3.1 trillion, sorry. So you think about that. I mean, I did a rudimentary Google search, right, looking at that in terms of what that would mean as an economy by itself. Right, if you compare that to likes of the US, UK, what does that mean? It would mean that would be, if we were treating financial crime by itself, would be the 5th largest economy in the world. So that gives you a kind of size of the scale of the problem that we face, right? And as a result of that, there's continual pace of change, continual updates within legislation and regulation to try and combat what is obviously a huge societal problem that we have. There was, just by comparison, there was a World Bank report about 10 years ago, which calculated anywhere from about $800 billion to $2 trillion was being flowed through the financial system. So within the space of 10 years, we're now calculating an extra $1 trillion on top of that. So it's fairly monumental in that respect. So that kind of puts it into perspective a little bit. In that regards, I'd say it's probably a highly politicized subject anyway, but you always have new legislation, new regulation coming out to try and make a dent in that for whatever dent it can do. So if I was to just give you an example, the UK Parliament have just passed an act called the UK Economic Crime and Corporate Transparency Act, right? And that's there to well, many things. One of the things it's introducing is a failure to prevent fraud offence. So a corporate offence where if you are of a certain threshold, certain size, certain employee base, there is an offence, corporate offence there for you to failing to prevent fraud, essentially, but fraud that is for the benefit of the organisation. So as a practitioner, bringing that in-house, understanding what that means, understanding risk profile against that, what processes we have in place, what's reasonable procedures under the guidance, what do we have to do? That's kind of a day in the life of a practitioner in financial crime. It's about absorbing that, understanding what that means for you and how do you mitigate that appropriately. And that's just one of a subset of many differing changes, that if you are in a global organization, you're facing that, across many different jurisdictions, many different competing pieces of regulation as well.
And if I can stay with you on that, because I think it's really important to talk about corporate responsibility is critical, not just in that financial sector, but how important is your understanding of the financial crime landscape in conjunction with other areas such as sustainability and human rights, etc.? Because to me, you can't really look at any of those in silo anymore. They have so many joint implications.
Yeah, I think, you're absolutely right, Michelle. You can't really. And I think that's where a joined up collaborative approach is usually required. I think if you look at it from the ESG lens, G being the governance side, that's really where I would see financial crime in that respect really kind of sitting. But financial crime in itself, those are kind of more predicate offences, right? The human trafficking, modern slavery aspect, financial crime and money laundering in particular is just the kind of the follow-on piece from that. It's really a case of coordinating more than anything else. If I talk from a Beazley perspective, ESG is high on the agenda for us. We've recently introduced heads of social impact as an example to look at our societal aspects of that, under modern slavery and those kind of topics in those areas. But it's something that it's not going to work as an organisation if you look at this in silo, and similarly with the data as well.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Eric, I know if I can ask you a quick question, because I know, again, we're talking, it is definitely a global footprint that we need to be aware of, but of course within the United States we've got some additional challenges, especially with the new political landscape that's happening, etc. I'm interested, what are some of the effective strategies that businesses, and I have to talk about governments, can implement to strengthen their anti-laundering efforts? If I could hand that one to you, Eric.
Yeah, great question, Michelle. I mean, especially in the US, we're probably the least transparent region in the world when it comes to businesses having to disclose, who the beneficial owners are and any information. And the fact that a lot of the business registries are at the state level. So there's not, well, at this time, obviously the FinCEN database that's coming hopefully sooner than later will alleviate some of those challenges. But, I think the four biggest things, that corporations can do to combat on their side are really coming down to data aggregation, right? Being able to look across the organization and have standardized, clean data, advanced analytics to be able to, look at the macro level of particular risks. And obviously, as David mentioned, the changing regulatory compliance and new laws that are being passed. So being able to spot those and react quickly to those, and also training and education of their employees, making sure that they're, up to date on the latest, policies and procedures. A lot of times, when there's a cyber breach, for example, it's typically something that happens from somebody clicking an email that they shouldn't have.
Some of the points that David brought up on, the financial risk and impacts and what we're looking at from, crime as a service nowadays. I'm wondering if you guys are seeing more of a threat in certain verticals, or certain verticals less prepared than the financial industry. I think the financial industry, as David had mentioned, has had a lot of insights into this. They've been preparing for crypto and what's that impact on the financial world. But as we look beyond kind of financial services, banking, and insurance, are there other verticals that you guys are seeing that are more vulnerable to these type of attacks and should be focused more on preparation and the data in the back end? Have we seen that type of rollout, or is it just across the board, everybody's vulnerable?
I would say that we have seen shortcomings becoming particularly evident in all sectors. We've seen cases of violation of, sanctions and anti-bribery and export control laws, where enforcement authorities from different jurisdictions actually collaborate to build robust evidence to define civil monetary penalties, and this has been applied across any sector. There is no one specific sector, especially because criminals tend to adapt very quickly. Nowadays we talk a lot about trade-based money laundering and the sanctions evasion. Most of the sanctions circumvention happens through trade with third countries and impacting any sector, any company involved in exporting critical items, for instance. So I would not say that this is a peculiarity of the financial institutions. You need to understand, for a corporate company, for instance, all the phases of a trade process from initiation to settlement. That because would improve the detection capability and disruption success rate of illicit activities. And trade-based money laundering is one good example. So if you are a company, an importer or an exporter, you might probably, and this is the key in my opinion, you might not necessarily question or investigate the involvement of a third party in the payment settlement process. Why there is this lack of scrutiny that it could be a major serious problem, could be to a variety of reasons, such as a lack of awareness about the potential risks or the trust in the financial institutions, which plays role of as a partner because it's handling the transaction. So you need to test your level of maturity, because you could be part of a scheme, knowing that transportation sectors, if you think of this, a global supply chain, they are becoming increasingly complex and they are susceptible to geopolitical shift. Look at what's happening in the Red Sea events and what authorities like State Department or Homeland Security, they issue guidelines and best practices around transportation. Know your cargo, know your item. So I see really these across the board.
So with the changes on logistics and ship lanes, etc., which has happened, it happens quite abruptly, and it's changing again, as we know, over this next weekend. How important is it to get a relationship with somebody like Moody's or LexisNexis or, an organization like that, that is getting that information, quickly and responsively and sent it out to the likes of organizations? How are you getting it? How quickly do you get it? And just what impact is those economic changes affecting your information?
Yeah, great question, Michelle. Well, I think it all, it comes down to data, right? Being able to source and clean the most aggregated, excuse me, not aggregated, but being able to clean the most publicly available data to be able to create a picture for our clients to be able to make quick decisions and detect risks. So maybe 10 years ago, this was all very fragmented data, right? So having to piece together beneficial owners and put together a huge tree using multiple different sources. But where companies like Moody's come in is trying to partner with, best-in-class information providers from around the globe to be able to create a quick picture of a company's organizational structure, and also being able to deliver, what are the associated risks of that company? Is there somebody on the board that could be exposed politically? Is there a controlling shareholder that could be exposed to some type of sanction risk? Or is there some type of reputational risk that they would want to be concerned about? So where I think, at a crux, it's the data in terms of being able to aggregate the most publicly available data to help companies find the needle in the haystack quicker, while also applying smart technologies to that to be able to, let the good guys through quite easily, while allowing, investigators to focus on the material risks and investigating, those high risk cases.
So, David, if I hand that back to you, right, because as we say, it is a very volatile environment that we're living in globally at the moment. How do you identify red flags today and tomorrow, whenever this volatility is changing so rapidly? What are you looking out for, and what are you looking for with an organization like LexisNexis or Moody's or D&B to actually provide to you?
Yeah, thanks, Michelle. I mean, if we can maybe stick on the lens of sanctions for a minute, maybe that's one I can utilize to best kind of describe it. So understanding the red flags today and tomorrow, it's a difficult one, right? I think what I'd say is that it's about having as much information available to you as possible. We aren't necessarily going to know everything all of the time, but by collaborating. So if I give an example, Nicola mentioned about State Department guidance. So the US State Department issue quite a lot of information around sanctions evasion techniques that are happening with Russia, North Korea, Syria, and the like, right? What's happening in shipping? How are they, North Korea, for example, how are they able to still kind of circumvent UN sanctions and get oil into the country, right? That's all very helpful information. So keeping your ear close to the ground and understanding all of that is helpful. I think collaborating with peers, and I'm sure we'll probably come on to these kind of topics of kind of industry bodies and the like, collaborating regulatory bodies is always necessary. That's one side of it. I think when we talk about leveraging the likes of Moody's and other providers, it's really about having, a bit like Eric was talking about, having as much information as possible, as soon as possible. Understanding how quickly you're going to get that information and the way it's presented as well. But for me, it's not so much a case of once you've got it, that's it. It's not set and forget, put it that way. It's constantly looking at it and collaborating and calibrating it, so that you are ensuring that it reflects what you want it to see, what you need it to see, what those risks are for you as an organization. Appreciate everybody's going to be slightly different and have different risk appetites, risk profiles, maybe even different appetite for red flags that they want to be picking up and seeing. So, it's that constant data oversight, checking what's coming in, checking that you're as aware as you can be with your ear to the ground as to what's going on. Certainly that's how you try and manage the sanctions piece. I think that's quite a fluid moving piece at the moment, particularly when it comes to Russia.
And if I extend on that a bit more, Nicola, from your perspective, so we talk about aggregation, information, compliance, regulations, volatility, economic climates. Where's technology fitting in with that? How do we line up technology with all of this information? Where is it moving from an AI or a machine learning perspective? Because to me, that there's no borders when it comes to AI. There's no real true regulation activity. So it must in itself have implications from a financial laundering and sanctions perspective.
No, certainly technology and AI has a major impact on empowering humans in detecting suspicious transactions and actually in being more proactive than reactive. So being able to identify patterns than, for instance, humans would not be able to necessarily detect, but they will be able to dig deeper. So one use we have seen, for instance, with artificial intelligence in terms of reducing false positives or empowering individuals or being able to identify pattern. Technology is very important, of course, but it's not the panacea. It's not the necessarily the solution. It will be just an accelerator of I would say, a dynamic which is already in place. So what I was saying about what we're working on, if you take the example of, criminals, I was saying business is becoming more complex. There are companies, think of the identifying shell companies, for instance, which could be considered red flag. And we use data, but also we use analytics and technology to be able to identify those shell companies which are legitimate business, but they can be used for illegitimate purposes, right? One such misuse is, for instance, to obscure the true ownership of a business from law enforcement authorities, to perpetrate, for instance, a fraud or for sanctions evasion, escaping, circumventing sanctions restrictions. Now, this can be achieved in many ways, for instance, by appointing concurrent nominee directors who sit in many boards supplied by the company information agent with mass address registration. So you have many companies registered to the same address, or you have businesses, for instance, that they have no directors, for instance, or nominees. So all of these red flags, if you don't use technology as well, you might probably miss some of these signals. And just to give you a concrete example, so there was a notable case involving a Russian individual. Now, this individual operated a company formation agency based in the Seychelles, which assisted approximately 800 Russian nationals potentially evading sanctions or taxes in establishing shell companies. So how you identify those 800 Russian nationals, how you identify those potential shell companies? Well, you need the data, you need analytics, but you also need technology that helps you to identify and detect these suspicious patterns. So I see, it as an accelerator more than a drastic revolution, in my opinion.
I was reading something just before I joined the call, just to really give myself insight. How many Russian businesses have moved to the likes of Sri Lanka and India and other countries where they feel that they can understand or they have more opportunities then to create their business there and to move it, to transport that information throughout the world. What do you think of that? Like, where's the collaboration between the world authorities that are actually ensuring that we don't have this easy access to transcend your companies to some other country that's not got the same regulations? Was there collaboration globally that are working on things like this?
Oh yes, I think that there is a collaboration you see in many ways. It started, way back, if I have to go historically, even after following actually the September 11 attack, the US Treasury initiated a program called Terrorist Finance Tracking Program. Now, terrorism might seem a different topic, but it's all connected, geopolitical dynamic with all the economic, political, security implications. You see the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the Middle East conflict, the Red Sea hostilities, etc. They're all connected. Now, this program was designed, the TFTP, to identify, track, and pursue terrorists, and like groups like the Houthis, for instance. It has grown, evolved, etc. And you see similar cooperation on combating sanctions evasion. Actually, if you look at European institutions, they're aligned with the US expectations, if I can say so. And then there is also the pressure of the US secondary sanctions, which in some respect are playing, I would say, an additional pressure. Now, the US Treasury's Deputy Secretary very recently stated in an article, I think it was Financial Times, in December of last year, that foreign entities, financial institutions facilitating in any way transactions related to critical items for Russia could face secondary sanctions if their respective countries do not have stringent regulations. So if their country, their home regulator doesn't do the job, they will do it. So there is this additional, I would say, consequence that is kind of pushing for a better alignment, cooperation, and there are information exchanges program that facilitate, especially between Europe and the US, or of course the UK included, some convergence, I would say.
David, if I take that to you, because I have a question there for you. So that's a global perspective, but you work in insurance and finance, that's your area of expertise. How are that vertical actually working together to try and be combative towards these issues and concerns that we have?
Yeah, thanks, Michelle. I mean, I was actually just going to come on to that point real quick. I had another example. What Nicola said is absolutely true. There was a recent case as well with Cyprus. So I don't know if this was anything you were seeing before reading. So in Cyprus, there was similar to what you mentioned about Sri Lanka, Russian oligarchs who were moving over to Cyprus and able to essentially move funds through Cypriot businesses. And it was something that the US were watching. And the FBI actually, I think, sent agents to Cyprus to work with the Cypriot government to effectively remove these Russian funds and risks in Cyprus. And I think there was kind of an overhang there of, you need to comply with this or face consequences of US sanctions. And I think the US in particular play that card. I think one thing we've got to remember is the US not just claim jurisdiction over the territory, they claim jurisdiction over the US dollar. So in that sense, that's the one thing. So you don't get that with the UK or the EU sanctions, or I don't think many other global sanctions. It's just the US that have that. So it doesn't matter.
Explain that a wee bit, David. Explain that, because I think the audience would be interested in that.
But so what do I mean by that is essentially trading with an Indonesian company. If you're doing it in US dollars, the US will claim jurisdiction over that transaction. So if at any point in that transaction there is a breach of US sanctions, then either of those countries, regardless of where you are in the world, sanctions tend to be focused on where you are. Are you in the country? Are you a national of the country? Or are you conducting any business through the country? There isn't really much around the currency that's used. Certainly with the euro and the pounds, not so much. But with the dollar, that's where the US also claim jurisdiction. So regardless of where the transaction's happening, if it's in US dollars, they will claim jurisdiction over that. And given it's de facto global currency, it means that they have a very powerful tool to work with. So, and I was also just going to mention the G7 as well. We've started to see a lot of more coordination around Russia with the G7, right, with the oil price cap and the movement of Russian oil. So I think that coordination globally is happening more so than it ever once was. And we're yet to see, I think, fully, but with the UK and Brexit, there might be more alignment between UK and US sanctions as well coming into play. So I think that's also something. But yeah, more, I guess, in the insurance vertical. Just a bit of background. I came from banking. I've been in insurance now for about 7 years. I was in banking for about 7 or 8 years. And when I was at HSBC before I left to join Beazley. When I was at HSBC, I think there was at that point just about the creation of what's known as, we love acronyms in finance, so it's what's known as JMLIT, so Joint Money Laundering Intelligence Task Force. And that was the first real time within industry that we had a collaborative task force working with law enforcement around money laundering. That I think has since been expanded from banking into other financial service areas, so the likes of asset management and insurance. And that really enables us to understand what law enforcement are working on, what risks they're seeing, what profiles there are, and how we as the private sector can help with that. I mean, we're the ones that tend to hold most of the data for law enforcement to work on. So that's one area. So there's a lot more collaboration around that. I'd say there's a lot more in terms of industry forums. And when I say industry forums, we're looking at verticals around fraud. We're looking at verticals around sanctions. What are we seeing in the sector? What are we able to employ? Who's doing what, and how are they able to do it? I work. Beazley does a lot within shipping and within cyber as well. So within shipping, there's a lot of guidance, there's a lot of red flags, there's a lot of circumvention in sanctions, as Nicola was talking about, with trade-based sanctions circumvention being a big one. So, how are we monitoring vessels? How are we able to detect and understand where there's red flags, ship-to-ship transfers of products, for example, or what's known as your AIS, so the beacon that vessels use to essentially give off location, if that is tampered with, if that is turned off, if that is cloned or masked. Yeah, they can do all of that. So if that's happening, how are you monitoring that? What do you do if that happens? Is that a red flag if it's on its own? I can give just a brief story. That kind of beacon turning off was actually something that insurers were, sorry, the lights keep going off in this room. That's something that insurers were in fact encouraging insureds to do when they were going into regions that were high risk for piracy, right? So around the coast of Somalia, for example, you don't really want to be advertising your location to Somali pirates. So, on the one hand, you had discussions with insureds on turning your beacon off and when to do that. And then on the other side of it, we're now saying that is potentially a red flag for sanctions evasion. So, these are practical difficulties that you get in terms of red flags and what to watch out for, but then how to actually implement them into actual practice and business as usual becomes quite difficult and quite challenging. So having those industry forums is really important.
David, that's really interesting because we talked about the word collaboration there, and Nicola and Eric, and coming from those augmented providers, the information that you're working with. But if you don't have the same sort of collaboration from shipping companies or manufacturers that are going to provide you with that information, it's not going to work either. So it's making sure that you understand not only your own financial footprint from a sanctions perspective, but actually what information you have downstream as well from your suppliers or your providers as well.
Yeah, that's right, Michelle. So I think Eric mentioned the point. Sorry, I think it's transparency. Transparency across the chain is absolutely key. The easier by which you can get this information, the accuracy of the information, of course, as well. But first and foremost, having the information available to you.
Yeah, so I think that's, for me, it's a really interesting point because, if I look at Moody's especially, and Eric mentioned it at the beginning, it's not just knowing your direct suppliers, but it's also knowing those indirect suppliers and where they're coming from and the sanctions that are happening there as well. I actually have a buyer that we're working with at the moment who's actually going, I want to actually invite all of my direct suppliers because it's the only way that I have a true view of all of my risk and compliance. I think Telsa has actually just started doing a project like that going forward.
Going back to the comment on sanctions and relating it to the power of the US dollar, I mean, Eric, given you and I are both in the States, I was kind of interested on Moody's take, given we've got the elections coming up. Obviously could sway some sanction power one way or another. So I'm just wondering, how are you guys viewing 2024? How's that impact going to be coming? Because I think David's right, the dollar carries a lot of sanctions power with it, but I think there's some frustration around that in the market. So I'm interested in your take with this election year.
Yeah, somebody from the Moody's economics team probably has a much more detailed view on this than myself, Chad, but not to get political here, but obviously it's a very volatile time, and I think corporations are probably doing some analysis and planning. From who I have been speaking to, yes, it is a concern in terms of it, depending which party is going to be in office come next February, then there's potentially some contingency planning on how we could or how they could have to react or reshape their portfolios in terms of who are they engaging with, and to create potential contingency plans, whether it's a supplier in a different region of the world, or a different partner, etc. So I think that's always at the top of the mind of a chief compliance officer in terms of that potential regulatory change that might happen, and trying to, you see a lot of, I guess an example is with Apple recently, and they say the friendshoring of the supply chain, right? Moving a lot of the components to India, for example. So I think you might start to see some, movements like that, depending on, how the election shakes out. So I think at a high level, just to summarize, it's really, preparing potential contingencies for the third parties that you're working with in the event it goes either way.
Yeah, and I think the preparation for any change that you're going to have, as we've talked about, is the data. Clean data, having accurate data is going to be able to empower the compliance officers to make quick decisions as we see changes come out. So I think it's even more important to start to work on that preparation, as we've talked about, on at least the data cleanup, getting an understanding of your supply chain, the risks around it. What suppliers do you have, and how is that going to be impactful? Because I think you're right, there's going to be some changes in what comes next year, and being able to react quickly is going to be dependent on the data that you have available.
I'd love to finish up with one question, right? And I think all of you will have a different perspective of it. What advice would you give to somebody in business today who maybe isn't aware of sanctions, even if they're criminals, right? Because I think criminals need to be aware of this as well, and people who are doing the money laundering. What advice, and I'm going to go to Nicola because he's smiling, what advice would you give to them today in the economy or economics that we're living in, with the regulations, etc.? What should they be thinking about?
I will make a difference between sanctions, which are clearly a tool of foreign policy, national security. You ask a question about the US, if it's going to be any change now due to the upcoming election. Well, actually, we have not seen differences between Trump and Biden administration in the posture towards Iran. So there might be some continuity for some, of the geopolitical situations. For probably others who might see change if there is going to be, a switch from the Democratic to the Republican. But anyway, I think this will continue. Sanctions will continue. What I see, and we hear a lot about the strategic competition between the US and China, this is going to have a major impact on the global supply chain, and probably companies should get ready. And where I see one of the let's say challenges companies are finding, especially Western companies, is that based on the investigative journalists, a significant portion of foreign sourced battlefield components, and when I talk about components, I'm thinking about critical components, items that can be used for military purposes, so dual use goods or microchips, things like this, comes from outsourced production in countries with weaker export controls, typically China. So when you say Texas Instrument, for instance, so that's the issue. Western tech companies or any US companies, European companies, they tend to outsource to third countries. They have less control. And that's an issue because the item gets re-exported and maybe goes to a third country like Armenia, Kyrgyzstan, which are the neighboring country with Russia. And that's a way of circumventing sanctions. It's very difficult. And we know that US sanctions are extraterritorial. So if the item, even though it's manufactured in Asia or in Europe, contains US software, technology, or any US content, a license for export must be requested. And in some cases is rejected if it's denied and is an entity on the denied entity list of the Department of Commerce. Now, when it comes to fighting money laundering, so criminals, if I just look at the example of criminals in Europe, now what the law enforcement agencies have been able to seize, to confiscate as, the illicit assets, we talk about 1%, which is being calculated by Europol around 4 billion, something approximately 4 billion euros, which is almost nothing. 99% is still out there that need to be confiscated, which is quite impressive. But we see in Europe, at least the European Commission has set a roadmap how to fight organized crime and drug trafficking, because crime is becoming more of a network. The individuals don't operate in an isolated fashion, but they operate it through network crime as a service, and often forming alliances with other criminal organizations, mafia type of organizations. They're increasing and strengthening their investigative tools. They're investing in technology, artificial intelligence. They're investing in better data to perform, investigation. So I see that the posture is there, especially because right now we know most of the member states are running on very high budget deficit, and all of this makes sense. I think it will be harder for them in the future.
Similar question to yourself, please, David. What do you think we should be doing in industry today and looking out for just going forward?
Yeah, sure. Do you mean in terms of risks, Michelle, financial crime risks? Yeah. Yeah, of course. I think maybe just following on from what Nicola was saying a little bit, I think there is a real risk of I saw was it a news article the other day, AI. So it was an employee, I can't remember which company it was, deep faked. It's a call made by a CEO, which wasn't his CEO, through which he then wired $25 million. So it was effectively defrauded through a deep fake. So I think AI is something to be certainly quite careful of, look out for. I think particularly if you're in the information security space within your organizations, that's definitely something you should be thinking about and understanding kind of the risks of that and what to look for. I think in talking about cybercrime in itself, I think we spoke a little bit about ransomware. I think that's an area that again is, I think, on the rise. Chad, you mentioned crime as a service. It's very much a model that has existed for a number of years, but I think we're starting to. I think there was a bit of an expectation that with the war in Ukraine potentially stabilizing a little bit, that we would see some of these hacking groups start to refocus back on Western organizations. There hasn't been as much of that, I don't think, as what we'd expected to see, but that's not to say it might not still be coming. And then I think, more from a regulatory standpoint, we touched on it at the start. I think regulation is going to become a far more stringent regulatory landscape. I think particularly around financial crime, and money laundering particularly, it's not going away. We're seeing more and more directives being issued by the EU for us to be focusing on and working on. And then the final thing from me, and I guess more to the data point around all of this, is that we should be certainly looking to harness data where possible. I think we've all got a lot to do with not much resource, time, or budget to do it, and I think finding efficiencies is a real key in a lot of this. Certainly from a financial services perspective, the regulators are far more interested in not just implementing tools, but also what you're doing with them, what data's feeding into them, what calibration you've got going on, how you're reorganizing those tools to suit your business model and risk profile. So, if that is something that the businesses are thinking about, then it's not just a case of implementing, but also having appropriate governance around them as well.
It's easy to detect if somebody's name is on a list. The toughest part is, the downstream effects. A lot of times now we're seeing a lot of risks in distributors. So if somebody is selling goods on your behalf and you don't know who is ultimately buying those goods or where they're ending up, similar to the TI instruments Nicola referenced. I think one of their components was found in an Iranian drone. So a lot of predictive analytics too, and using AI there to try to spot anomalies or certain trends to be able to have some type of risk detection into where those goods are going on an organization's behalf or on the sub tier.
Before we want to leave, I want to just give our audience some facts and some figures, because I think it's really important to just understand just how important this is. So in 2022, there were more global sanctions than any other year. There was over 9,310. In 2023, there was 6,058. Fraud scams, there was 485.6 billion losses, according to NASIC. The IRS criminal investigation initiated more than 2,676 criminal investigations with over 37.1 billion from tax and financial crimes alone. Ransomware payments in 2023 surpassed 1 billion. This is not going away. The importance of ensuring that master data is validated and verified, that you've got relationships with organizations like Moody's, etc., that's providing key information at the right time for you is critical to the success of your business going forward. I just want to thank my audience here today. It's been really appreciative. I've definitely learned an awful lot. So thank you all very, very much for your support and guidance during the session today.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah.
Thank you.